Hi, I'm Kate from Sew Into Overlocking and welcome to our online learning centre. Today's project class is making a scarf or creating embellished fabric using your Coverstitch machine. I'm really excited to share this technique with you. It's something that's really fun. I do love my Coverstitch machine for hemming, but it has so many more applications, and this is an area where you can take it to the next level. So the project we're going to do today is a little scarf. You just need a piece of chiffon, or it could be a polyester chiffon or a silk chiffon, but something sort of lightweight and floaty works really nicely through the machine. So if your piece is about 40 to 50 centimetres wide, buy the full width of fabric. So you can always reduce it down once you've created your piece of fabric or your finished scarf. This one is about 40 centimetres by the full width of fabric, which is about 110 wide. So I'm using on my looper beautiful Silco thread from Wonderful. So this thread is a 35 weight cotton thread which has absolutely no lint. It is superb. It is so fine and lovely to work with. The colour that I'm working with is Silco SCM 27. Gorgeous variegation which matches really well with my fabric. And then I've chosen polyester threads to match the colours within the variegated thread. So I've got an orange, a teal and a hot pink. So you can play with the different thread types. I'm also set up for a triple cover stitch. So you can use this technique for any of your cover stitch applications, being a triple, wide or narrow cover stitch. And you can even change as you go through, which is actually what I've done with this scarf. I've removed needles and played with the different settings. And that's what I love about this. There is absolutely no rules. So your fabric is going to be a really unique piece that works perfectly for you. So I do have a scrap piece of fabric here. So I'm going to just do a bit of a test sew. I've, as I said, threaded up for my triple cover stitch, and I'm currently on my standard settings for the machine. So every cover stitch machine is a little bit different. So start with your standard settings and then do a test. Make sure you have a little bit of extra fabric to play with, and that way you will be able to see clearly the tension setup that you need. Because once we start putting different threads on our machine and different weight fabrics, you might find that your tension setup will need to be different. So let's have a look at what we're doing. So my initial piece that I've sewn out, if I turn that over, you should be able to see from the camera that's above me, you'll see that it's actually stitched out quite tight. It's gathered up a little bit, and this is actually due to the weight of the fabric that we're working with because it is such a lightweight fabric. So I'm going to reduce my looper tension, and this will help to just stop this channeling and what's actually happening with the threads pulling in. So I'm going to take my looper tension back. It was sitting on 3, so I'm going back to 1, and we'll just sew out a little bit more and see what happens. So that's actually giving me a little bit more looper thread underneath my stitch. The other thing that's quite good when we're working with different weight fabrics is to adjust differential feed. So that's going to be my next adjustment that I'm going to do. And what I'm going to do is lower my differential feed below N or 1, depending on what brand machine you have. 1 or N is your standard setting. And when we increase differential feed, what happens is it takes more fabric in. So if I was really wanting this to scrunch up and create a lovely textured look, I would increase my differential feed. But what I really want to do with this is actually slow the feed down so that it eases out the feed of the fabric, and then my finished piece will sit a little bit flatter. So the differential feed adjustment has actually really helped. You'll see how bubbly and scrunched that is. Reducing the looper tension has eased that out a little bit, but then the differential feed has made that somewhat flatter. We are still a little bit scrunched and bubbly, and it just depends on what the piece is that you're working on. Sometimes this can actually look really interesting and add an extra element to the work. But what I'm going to do is just reduce my needle tension slightly, and this will help with our stitches sitting a little bit flatter. So I might go back with this Baby Lock Euphoria. Auto tension is sitting on 0, and then I'm going back to -2. So if you have a machine where your needle tensions normally sit on about 4, you might take it back to say 3 or 2. And that is sitting beautifully now. So the adjustment does make the back of the work sit a little bit loopy, but I think in this situation it really doesn't matter, because we're just having fun and creating something quite beautiful, but it is sitting much flatter on this side. So I'm just going to run this out. Now on this particular model, I can chain out. So just check with your brand Coverstitch machine if you actually have the ability to chain out or not. The majority of them you can't. So you will need to finish it in the standard way that you finish Coverstitch, which I normally would bring my needles up to the highest position, raise my presser foot, and then draw my threads forward. Purple thing or a credit card works really well for this technique as well, because it's so flat. And if I was organised, I'd have a pair of scissors on hand that I could just cut through those threads and take the work out the back on a 45-degree angle. And what that does is allow your needle threads to pull through. So that's sitting quite beautifully there. And now we're ready to really start our project. So what I like to do to start the project is to take my long piece of fabric, and this feels super long, this one. We're going to overlap the ends so that they sit flat, and this whole piece actually forms a loop. Then I'm going to place this under the foot of the machine. And it doesn't matter if this is a bit messy, because we're going to cut this away at the end. A couple of hand turns, and we're going to stitch this closed, just overlapping the work. Thread actually makes such a beautiful chain. If you do have a machine that can chain out, that is just gorgeous. You could have lots of fun doing creative things with that. All right, so to get your work out of the machine, now that we've formed a loop, we just need to have the threads all running freely, and bring your needles up to the highest position, and then you can just bring the work back in under the foot like that. So I've joined my loop. Now I'm going to place the edge of the fabric under the machine, and place my foot down. Now this is the fun part of this project. We are just going to continue to stitch in the round until we get all the way across to the other side. And you can do straight lines or you can curve. The more you cross over, the more interest and fun you're going to create in your project. Just wanted to stop and mention that not all the machines have a large throat space like this one. So for a model that has a much smaller throat space, just as you're working across your fabric, just make sure you're scrunching up the work to the side or rolling it up so that it doesn't get caught back in underneath. So you might have to sort of slow stitch in sections so that you're able to keep that bulk of that work as you move across out of the way. Now I've nearly made it across to the other side of my work. I've just noticed though that my thread is a little bit twisty and tangling up a little bit as it's coming off the spool. So if you have this situation to deal with, the best thing to do is to get a thread net, and you should have these in the accessories of your machine. And we're going to place that around the spool of the thread. So we want to make sure that the top of the thread net's not sitting up too high, that the thread's going to actually snag in it. So I like to pull that down and just poke the excess of the thread net up the base of the cone, and then that should sit on perfectly and just prevent the thread from twisting and tangling on itself. So I'm going to show you now, when you get to the edge of your work, how to finish it off. So as we get towards the edge, I can simply run my work out, because as I mentioned before, this particular model does chain out. If yours doesn't, just sew as close as you can to the edge of the fabric. Bring your needles up to the highest position And then we're going to raise the presser foot lever, draw the threads forward and cut through them. This allows me to then take the work out of the machine, and the needle threads will pull through to the back. I'll just need to cut the looper thread once I've taken it out. So I'll just do a little snip there. Perfect. And then I can just gently remove my work out of the machine. So you can see I have one side of my scarf finished with the chain looper side with the triple cover stitch showing, and I'm just loving the colours. I think it looks gorgeous. So now we're going to pop it back under the foot. I'm going to place the fabric up with the cover stitch side of the stitching facing me. And that means that my needles are now going to be stitching over the top of the cover stitch, but it's also going to create our reverse cover stitch on the back of the work as well. So I've just noticed my poor spool of thread is just about on its last legs. There's not very much left at all, so I'm glad I actually noticed that now. It isn't a whole spool though. I have been using this thread for other projects, so it just depends how much you're actually stitching as to how much thread you're going to use up. I do like to overdo it a little bit because I do love my cover stitch. Yeah, and I think it's looking just amazing. So we're going to finish off now. Again, get your work as close as you can to the edge, like so. We're going to raise the presser foot, raise the needles to the highest position, draw the threads forward and snip those and take the work out on the angle, out the back, and then we just need to still trim our looper thread. We'll slide that under the foot so we can get it all the way out. And I think that is just amazing. So the next step is going to be setting up my overlocker for a 3-thread narrow overlock. We're going to cut the piece that we overlapped and joined, and we're going to finish our scarf edge with a rolled hem as well. So I'll just swap over to my other machine and thread that up. Now I've swapped my machine over. I'm now sitting in front of my overlocker and I have it set up for a 3-thread rolled hem. I'm taking my piece of work that I've finished stitching And what I need to do is cut open this section that we overlapped at the start and cover stitched. So you can be a bit rough with this, it doesn't have to be too precise initially, because I'll use a rotary cutter and ruler to make it really neat before I finish the neck edge on it. Or of course, if you're doing a straight scarf that you don't want to join it, like I've joined this one, you'd simply leave it like this and roll hem around all four sides. And that looks amazing too. So now I'm going to put it in front of the overlocker and we're going to roll hem just the two long edges. I did fail to mention that when I thread the machine, I've placed my Silco on the upper looper, and it's obviously a new spool because the other one had nearly run out. So that's sitting on the upper looper, and then I have two polyester threads sitting on my lower looper and my needle. For this particular model machine, I have my needle tension and upper looper tension on its standard, and I've taken the lower looper around to 7, and that's giving me a beautiful rolled hem. I've also removed my stitch finger, and my stitch length is sitting on just about 1 on this Bernina. But it's always good to have a play with your machine and the stitch length when you're roll hemming to make sure you're getting exactly the stitch that you require. Making sure too, as you come around, that any areas where you've started or finished, that you're actually using your blade to trim that section off, and that will give you a nice neat finish at the edge of your scarf. That's a really sensational rolled hem, it's beautiful. Now for the other side. So my two edges are now rolled hemmed. I'm actually just going to move to my cutting table, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter and ruler just to even off the ends of this and reduce any length. So it's always a good time to actually try the scarf at this point. And see, I think once I trim that off, that's going to give me a really nice length, and once it's rejoined, I like to be able to do a double twist with it if I need to, so it can sit shorter. So that's still going to give me the ability to do that as well. So I'm just going to make this nice and straight at the ends, and then we'll look at how we're going to finish it off. So I have my ends cut on the scarf. Now I could just bring them up and join them, but I actually like to create an infinity scarf. So what I do is when I bring them up and bring the edges level, I then flip them over so that one side creates that little twist in the bottom. So it's not one complete tube, but it actually has a twist, and I find that when you're wearing it as a longer scarf, it actually sits really well. I've set my overlocker up for a 3-thread narrow overlock. The stitch length sitting at about 2.5, but I quite like 2 when you're working with a lighter fabric like this. My tensions are all balanced, and I still have my Silco on the upper looper with my polyester thread on the needle. And we're just going to hold these edges together And I'll show you my favourite technique for when you're starting and finishing so that you don't have to draw the threads through later or finish using a product called Fray Stop. So we're just going to do 2 stitches onto the fabric, have the needles down, then we raise the presser foot and take the thread and make it nice and smooth out the back. Then we're going to bring it around in front of the needle and in front of the blade. Press a foot back down, and then as we start to stitch, that starting chain is going to be caught in under the needle and the blade will cut the excess off for me. And now I'm getting towards the end of the work. I want my needle to go just past the edge of the fabric. Then you finish with the needle in the highest position. We're going to raise the presser foot and we're going to flip the work upside down. Really important at this point that we don't cut our work because we're going to stitch back over the top of it, and if we go too close to the blade we're going to actually cut our edge. So we just want to keep the work. This machine has a little marker here on the foot. Some brands will have a line on the needle plate, what I like to call the death line, because if you cross that the blade's going to actually cut your work. So we're going to do just a couple of stitches over the top. And then if I run it out, I'm going to end up with a big ugly finish, which often happens when you're overlocking. So the correct technique to finish is to raise the presser foot and pull just a small amount of thread down and turn your work away. I can then continue to chain out, not sewing on my fabric. But that gives you the best finish. That little piece of chain there, I can just use a hand needle to put in underneath, but that's super tidy. And my new fabric made scarf is now finished. As I said, it is long enough that I can do a double fold if I want to. But this application can be used in bag making. It can be used in any sort of clothing as panels in jackets or tops or skirts, or just think about some of the really fun things that you could create using this technique. And as I said, I've used triple cover stitch all the way through because it fills in the gaps really quickly for me, but you could remove needles and you could do chain stitch or narrow cover stitch, and it's fun to explore the different stitches. Or you could even swap the threads over too and have some different thread types running through your work. So I'd love to see what you create with this. So you can always get in touch with me through my socials, which is Sew Into Overlocking on Instagram and Facebook, or through my website, which is sewintoverlocking.com. So I hope you found this class beneficial, and I'd love to see what you create. Until I see you next time, happy overlocking and cover stitching.